The auction was over. The holding bay, once crowded with cages and the murmurs of desperation, now stood empty save for the lingering stench of fear and the occasional echo of footsteps as the last of the buyers departed. Sisyphus VII's perpetual twilight seeped through the cracked dome overhead, casting long shadows across the rusted metal floor. Herman stood motionless in the corner, his weathered face betraying nothing. He hadn't come to buy. He never did. Yet something compelled him to attend these auctions, perhaps a perverse form of self-punishment, a reminder of the depravity that humanity was capable of, even here at the edge of explored space. He was about to leave when a commotion near the back storage area caught his attention. Two handlers were arguing over something, or someone, still caged in the shadows. "Just space it," the taller one said, gesturing dismissively. "Not worth the food it'll consume on the return journey. Regulations say we need authorization," the second handler replied, though his tone suggested he didn't particularly care either way. Herman shouldn't have moved closer. He shouldn't have looked, but his feet carried him forward regardless, as if guided by some force beyond his conscious mind. The cage contained what appeared to be a female humanoid, though clearly not of Earth origin. Her skin held a blue-gray tint that reminded Herman of the perpetual dusk outside. Her hair, what remained of it, was a startling crimson, like the core of a dying star. She lay curled in on herself, unmoving except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Her eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing. What's wrong with her? The question left Herman's mouth before he could stop himself. The handlers turned, surprised to find someone still lingering. "Defective merchandise," the taller one said with a shrug. "Xylosian hybrid. They're usually valuable for their resonance abilities, but this one's broken. Won't respond, won't perform. Might as well be dead. Going to cost us to dispose of it properly," the other handler added. "Unless." Herman felt their eyes on him, assessing, calculating. "You want it? Free of charge," the tall one offered with a mirthless smile. "Save us the paperwork." Herman stared at the creature, the woman, in the cage. Something in her vacant gaze struck a chord deep within him, resonating with a part of himself he'd long thought dead. In her eyes, he recognized his own emptiness mirrored back at him. "I'll take her," he heard himself say, the words hanging in the stale air between them. The handlers laughed. "Your funeral," the shorter one said, already unlocking the cage. "No refunds, no returns." When they roughly pulled her out, she didn't resist, didn't even acknowledge being moved. They thrust a thin chain into Herman's hand, the legal marker of ownership, and turned away, already forgetting both of them. Herman stood there, the chain cold in his palm, wondering what madness had possessed him. He had come here to witness depravity, not participate in it. Yet now he was a slave owner, the very thing he despised. "Come on," he muttered to the woman, though he doubted she understood. "Let's go home." She followed without resistance, her movements mechanical, her eyes fixed on some middle distance. As they exited the dome and faced the perpetual twilight of Sisyphus 7, Herman felt the familiar sting of the icy wind against his face. The woman didn't even flinch as the cold hit her exposed skin. Herman's dwelling sat perched on a rocky outcropping halfway up one of the smaller mountains that surrounded the colony. It was isolated, difficult to reach, exactly as he preferred it. The trek took nearly an hour, and throughout, the woman followed silently, stumbling occasionally, but never complaining, never speaking. The cabin itself was little more than a repurposed emergency shelter, its exterior weathered by years of exposure to Sisyphus VII's harsh climate. Inside, a single room contained the essentials: a heating unit, a sleep platform, a food preparation area, and a small workspace where Herman occasionally tinkered with scraps of metal and stone. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and it was his. Now it would be hers too. Herman gestured to the sleep platform. "You can rest there," he said, though he still wasn't sure if she understood. Her vacant expression hadn't changed during their journey. He busied himself preparing a simple meal: reconstituted protein, some preserved vegetables from the colony's hydroponic gardens. When he turned to offer her a portion, He found her exactly where he'd left her, standing motionless by the door. "You need to eat," he said, placing the bowl on the small table. "And you should get warm." For a moment, he thought he saw something flicker behind her eyes, a brief spark of awareness, quickly extinguished. But she didn't move toward the food. With a sigh, Herman approached her, gently taking her arm and guiding her to the table. She offered no resistance, but made no effort to help either. When he placed the spoon in her hand, her fingers closed around it automatically, but she made no move to use it. "Like this," he said, demonstrating with his own meal. Her eyes tracked his movements, but her hand remained still. Eventually, Herman gave up. He took the spoon from her unresisting fingers and began to feed her himself, one small spoonful at a time. She accepted each bite mechanically, her eyes now fixed on a point somewhere beyond his shoulder. When the meal was finished, Herman guided her to the sleep platform. "Rest," he said, arranging a thermal blanket over her thin form. "Things might seem better tomorrow." Even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. Nothing got better on Sisyphus 7. That wasn't the way of this place. Herman settled himself on the floor beside the heating unit, wrapped in his own blanket. As the artificial night cycle deepened, he found himself questioning his own sanity. What had he been thinking? He had no way to care for another being, especially one so damaged. He barely managed to keep himself alive and functioning. Yet as he drifted towards sleep, he couldn't help but feel that something had shifted within him. For the first time in years, he wasn't completely alone in the darkness. Morning on Sisyphus 7 arrived as it always did, with a slight lessening of the perpetual gloom. Herman woke stiff and cold despite the heating unit's steady output. For a moment, he lay still, wondering if the previous day had been some strange dream. Then he heard it, a soft sound barely perceptible. Turning his head, he saw the woman still on the sleep platform, her position unchanged. But her eyes were moving now, tracking something invisible across the ceiling. And from her throat came a low, continuous hum, just at the edge of hearing. Herman approached cautiously, not wanting to startle her. The humming stopped as he drew near, her eyes immediately returning to their vacant state. "Can you understand me?" he asked, kneeling beside the platform. "Nothing. Do you have a name?" Still nothing. Herman sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I'm going to call you Lyra," he decided. The name came from nowhere, a distant memory of a constellation seen from Earth, perhaps. "My name is Herman." Her expression didn't change, but for an instant, he thought he saw her pupils dilate slightly. "I need to clean you up," he continued, more to fill the silence than because he expected a response. "And find you some proper clothes." Herman had a small supply of medical-grade cleaning wipes, intended for machinery, but safe enough for skin. Carefully, gently, he began to wipe away the grime from her face, her hands, her neck. She neither helped nor hindered him, remaining passive throughout. Her skin beneath the dirt was smoother than he'd expected, with faint patterns like whorls or fingerprints visible in certain lights. Up close, he could see that her crimson hair was actually composed of thousands of fine filaments, each one a slightly different shade of red. "You're quite extraordinary, you know," he murmured as he worked. "I've never seen anyone quite like you." As for clothing, Herman had little to offer. He found a spare thermal shirt, too large for her slight frame, but cleaner and warmer than the tattered garment she wore. With awkward, fumbling movements, he helped her change, trying to afford her what dignity he could in the process. "There," he said when he was done. "That's better, isn't it?" Her eyes met his for the briefest moment, and he could have sworn there was a question in them. But just as quickly, they returned to their vacant stare. Days passed in much the same fashion. Each morning, Herman woke to the sound of her humming, always stopping the moment he stirred. Each day, he tried to coax some response from her, some acknowledgement that she understood him. And each night, he slept on the floor beside the heating unit, leaving the sleep platform to her. He established routines. Food in the morning, a brief venture outside when the weather permitted, simple tasks around the cabin that he narrated as he performed them. Sometimes he would work at his small bench, shaping pieces of scavenged metal or stone with tools worn smooth from years of use. "I used to be an engineer," he told her one day as he worked. Not expecting a response, but finding comfort in the sound of his own voice after so many years of silence. Specialized in atmospheric systems. Ironic, considering where I ended up. He glanced over at Lyra, seated on the edge of the sleep platform, her posture unnaturally still. I made a mistake, he continued, turning back to his work. People died because of it. So I came here, the farthest place I could find from everything I'd known. The tool in his hand slipped, slicing a thin line across his palm. Herman hissed in pain, dropping both the tool and the small sculpture he'd been working on. The piece, a crude representation of a bird in flight, clattered to the floor, one wing breaking off on impact. Damn it, he muttered, clutching his bleeding hand. Movement caught his eye. Lyra had risen from the platform and was now standing over the broken sculpture. Slowly, with movements that seemed almost painful in their deliberation, she knelt and picked up both pieces. Herman watched, breath held, as she fitted the broken wing back against the bird's body. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the pieces together. Then, to his astonishment, she began to hum, a different sound from her morning musings, more focused, more intense. The air between her hands seemed to shimmer, and when she finally released the sculpture, the wing remained attached, the break line barely visible. She raised her eyes to meet his, and for the first time, Herman saw something there, a flicker of awareness, of presence. "You fixed it," he whispered. Lyra's lips parted, but no sound emerged. She looked down at the repaired sculpture, then back at Herman's bleeding hand. With the same deliberate movements, she reached out and took his injured hand in hers. The humming began again, and Herman felt a strange vibration pass through his palm, a sensation like tiny bubbles beneath his skin. When she released him, the cut had closed, leaving only a faint pink line to show it had ever existed. Herman stared at his hand, then at Lyra. "Thank you," he said softly. She didn't respond, but she didn't immediately retreat into her vacant state either. Instead, she remained kneeling on the floor, her eyes fixed on the bird sculpture, a faint tremor running through her slender frame. "Are you all right?" Herman asked, concerned by her shaking. Lyra opened her mouth again, and this time, a sound emerged, rough and rusty, as if her vocal cords had forgotten how to form words. "Why?" The single word hung in the air between them, simple yet profound in its implications. She could speak. She understood. She questioned. Herman wasn't sure how to answer. Why had he taken her in? Why had he cared for her? Why was he here on this desolate moon? All of these questions and more seemed contained in that single word. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I just couldn't leave you there." This seemed to confuse her. The trembling increased, and she clutched the bird sculpture so tightly that Herman feared it might break again. Then, without warning, she slumped forward, unconscious. Herman caught her before she hit the floor, alarmed by the sudden collapse. Her skin felt cold, her breathing shallow. Carefully, he lifted her onto the sleep platform and covered her with a thermal blanket, his mind racing. Had he pushed her too far? Had the effort of repairing the sculpture and healing his hand overtaxed her already fragile system? He had no way to know, no medical equipment beyond a basic first aid kit, and certainly no understanding of Xylosian physiology. All he could do was wait. Lyra remained unconscious for nearly 2 days. During that time, Herman barely left her side, monitoring her breathing, trying to get water past her lips, talking to her continuously in the hope that his voice might provide an anchor. He told her about Earth, about the engineering marvels he'd helped create, about the disaster that had driven him to exile. He spoke of the constellations no longer visible from Sisyphus 7, of the taste of fresh fruit, of the sound of ocean waves. He talked until his voice grew hoarse, filling the silent cabin with words long left unspoken. On the morning of the 3rd day, Herman woke to the familiar sound of humming. Lyra was sitting up on the sleep platform, her eyes clear and focused, watching him intently. "You're awake," he said, relief flooding through him. "Yes." Her voice was stronger now, though still hesitant, as if each word required careful consideration. "I remember." "Remember what?" "Everything. Her hand moved to touch the thermal shirt he'd given her, then her own face, as if confirming her existence. They broke me, tried to make me nothing. Herman moved to sit beside her on the platform, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Who did? The slavers. Lyra shook her head, the crimson filaments of her hair catching the dim light. Before them, my people. She struggled with the word, as if the concept of belonging was foreign to her. I failed the resonance trials. Could not control the gift. Dangerous, they said. Unpredictable. She looked down at her hands, turning them over as if they belonged to someone else. They tried to take it away. Cut it out. But it's part of me. Can't remove without. She gestured vaguely toward her head. Breaking. Herman felt a cold anger building within him. They did this to you? Your own people. Not people. Family. The distinction seemed important to her. Protect others from me. Then sold me when I became worthless. The word struck Herman like a physical blow. Worthless. How many times had he applied that same label to himself? You're not worthless, he said firmly. Look what you did. You fixed the sculpture. You heal my hand. Lyra's gaze drifted to the small bird sculpture still sitting on his workbench. Small things, broken before, trying to remember how to be whole. She pressed a hand against her chest. Like me, over the following weeks, Lyra's condition continued to improve. Her speech became more fluid, though she still favored short, direct sentences. Her movements grew less mechanical, more natural, and gradually, she began to share more about herself and her people. The Xylosians, she explained, were a race of natural resonators. They could sense and manipulate the vibrational patterns of matter through sound. It was a highly prized ability used for everything from healing to construction to art. But it required strict discipline and control, qualities Lyra had struggled with from childhood. I feel too much, she explained one evening as they sat before the heating unit, sharing a simple meal. Resonance requires detachment. I connect instead. Dangerous. Why dangerous? Herman asked. Lyra was silent for a long moment, her spoon hovering above her bowl. Resonance without control destroys. Once I tried to heal a broken limb, connected too deeply. The bone shattered instead. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They said I was flawed. Try to fix me. Made me empty instead. Herman thought of the vacant stare that had been her constant expression when he first brought her home. But you're not empty anymore. She looked at him then, her eyes holding a depth he was still growing accustomed to. No, finding pieces of myself. Small things first. She gestured to the bird sculpture, which now sat on a small shelf alongside other objects Herman had created. Then bigger things. Memory. Speech. Self. I'm glad, Herman said, meaning it more deeply than he could express. Lyra tilted her head, studying him with that penetrating gaze that sometimes made Herman feel transparent. You were empty too. Still are parts of you. Herman couldn't deny it. Yes, he admitted. I left most of myself behind when I came here. What? It was the same question she had asked weeks earlier, her first word to him. This time, Herman didn't evade it. I told you I was an engineer. He set down his bowl, appetite gone. What I didn't tell you was that I was responsible for the atmospheric systems on the Ceres outpost. There was a flaw in my design, a vulnerability I should have seen but missed. When the system failed, 3,000 people died before the backups engaged. The memories he'd tried so hard to suppress came flooding back. The alarms, the frantic calls, the horrifying realization of what he'd missed, and finally, the silence as the communications from Ceres ceased. They cleared me of criminal negligence, he continued, his voice hollow. Called it an unforeseeable interaction of components. But I should have foreseen it. That was my job. Lyra was silent, but her expression wasn't vacant. It was thoughtful, absorbing his words. Finally, she spoke. So you punish yourself. Here, alone. Put so simply, it sounded absurd. Yet Herman couldn't refute it. I suppose I do. Does it help the dead? The question caught him off guard. No, he admitted. Nothing can help them now. Does it help the living? Herman had no answer for that. The next morning, Herman woke to find Lyra already awake and engaged in an activity he'd never seen before. She sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, producing a complex series of harmonizing hums that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Small objects around the cabin, cups, tools, even dust particles, trembled slightly in response to her song. He watched in silence, not wanting to interrupt what was clearly a deeply focused state. The humming continued for several minutes before gradually fading away. When Lyra opened her eyes, she seemed more centered, more present than he'd ever seen her. "What was that?" he asked when it seemed safe to speak. "Morning resonance," she replied. "First time since before, reconnecting with the world's patterns." It was beautiful. A small smile touched her lips, the first Herman had seen. "Yes." Forgotten how it felt, she rose gracefully to her feet. "Today I help." And help she did. Despite her still recovering state, Lyra insisted on taking on tasks around the cabin. She approached each one with careful deliberation, sometimes humming softly as she worked. Under her attention, things seemed to improve. The heating unit ran more efficiently. The perpetually drafty window sealed tighter. Even the reconstituted food tasted somewhat better. When Herman commented on these changes, Lyra simply said, helping things remember their purpose. As the days passed, a routine developed between them. Mornings began with Lyra's resonance practice, which Herman came to appreciate for its serene beauty. They would share breakfast, then divide the day's tasks. Sometimes they worked together, other times they pursued separate activities. Herman at his workbench, Lyra experimenting with her gradually returning abilities. In the evenings, they would talk. Herman shared stories of Earth and his travels. Lyra spoke of her childhood on the Xylosian homeworld, a place of crystal spires and constant music. Neither pushed the other to discuss painful topics, but gradually, these two emerged. Herman's guilt over Ceres, Lyra's shame at failing her family's expectations. They believed resonance should be controlled, used with precision, she explained one night. But I always felt it should flow freely, connect rather than manipulate. They said such thinking was childish, dangerous. Maybe they were afraid of what they didn't understand, Herman suggested. Fear often leads to control. Lyra considered this, her head tilted in that now familiar gesture of contemplation. Yes, fear. She looked at him directly. Are you afraid of me? The question surprised him. No, he answered truthfully. Should I be? Perhaps. Still learning control. She gestured around the cabin. Small space. If resonance goes wrong. I trust you, Herman said, surprising himself with the realization that it was true. Somewhere along the way, he had begun to trust again, not just Lyra, but himself as well. The changes weren't limited to their private world. Eventually, necessity drove them to venture into the colony for supplies. Herman had been avoiding this, partly from his habitual reclusiveness, partly from concern about how others might react to Lyra. His concerns weren't unfounded. As they made their way through the settlement's grimy streets, they attracted numerous stares and whispers. Most colonists gave them a wide berth, particularly Lyra with her alien appearance and the almost tangible aura of strangeness that surrounded her. At the supply depot, the clerk, a heavy-set man named Dorgan who had never bothered to hide his contempt for Herman, openly scoffed when they approached. So the rumors are true, he said, eyeing Lyra with a mixture of curiosity and disgust. Old Herman bought himself some company, though I heard you got damaged goods, even for Xylo. Herman felt Lyra tense beside him, but kept his voice level. We need supplies. Standard ration pack, plus extra protein and vitamin supplements. Dorgan continued as if he hadn't heard. Never figured you for the type to keep slaves, Herman. Thought you were too high and mighty for that. His gaze raked over Lyra, assessingly. Though I suppose even damaged, she has her uses, eh? Herman's hands clenched into fists, but before he could respond, a low hum began to emanate from Lyra. It wasn't the peaceful sound of her morning practice, but something harder, more focused. The metal counter between them began to vibrate visibly. Not slave, Lyra said, her voice overlaid with harmonics that made the air shimmer. Person. Like you. Like him. The vibration intensified, causing small items on the counter to dance and rattle. Respect costs nothing. Try it. Dorgan's face paled as he took an involuntary step back. Keep that thing under control, he hissed at Herman, or I'll call security. The humming ceased abruptly. Lyra straightened, her expression calm but resolute. Supplies, please, she said, her voice now perfectly normal. We pay. After that encounter, word spread quickly through the small colony. Some began to refer to Lyra as the witch or the siren, attributing to her all manner of supernatural abilities. Others merely treated her as an oddity, a curiosity that Herman had salvaged from the slave markets. Few were openly hostile, but neither were they welcoming. Sisyphus 7 was not a place that valued difference or encouraged connection. Its residents had come there to escape, to hide, to forget, much as Herman had. Yet as the weeks turned into months, small changes began to occur. The craftsman who repaired environmental suits mentioned that Lyra had shown him how to improve his welding technique with a specific humming pattern. The hydroponics manager admitted that when Lyra visited, the plants seemed to grow more vigorously. Even Dorgan eventually conceded that her presence seemed to make the power cells in his depot hold their charge longer. Gradually, reluctantly, the colony began to accept her presence, if not fully embrace her. And in doing so, they also began to see Herman differently, not as the recluse to be avoided, but as the man who had recognized value where others saw only worthlessness. You're becoming respected, Lyra observed after one such visit to the colony. Herman shrugged uncomfortably. They respect you, not me. No, they fear me first. Now, they know me because you show them how. She paused, considering. You see value. They learn from you. Herman wasn't convinced, but he couldn't deny that something had shifted in his relationship with the other colonists. People who had previously ignored him now nodded in greeting. Conversations didn't immediately cease when he entered a room. It was a small change, but noticeable. Perhaps that's why he was less suspicious than he should have been when the off-world trader arrived. The trader's ship was sleek and well-maintained, a stark contrast to the rusted hulks that usually visited Sisyphus 7. Its owner, a tall, elegantly dressed woman who introduced herself simply as Vega, claimed to be interested in rare minerals found only on the moon. She insinuated herself into the colony's routines with practiced ease, asking questions about mining conditions, worker morale, administrative practices. Her charm and obvious wealth opened doors that would have remained closed to others. It wasn't until her third day that she approached Herman and Lyra as they were leaving the supply depot. Herman, isn't it? She said, extending a manicured hand. And your companion must be the Xylosian I've heard so much about. Herman shook her hand briefly, noting the calculating look behind her pleasant smile. This is Lyra, he said simply. Vega's eyes lingered on Lyra with an intensity that made Herman uneasy. Fascinating, she murmured. I've heard Xylosians possess remarkable resonance abilities, quite valuable in certain markets. Lyra isn't for sale, Herman said firmly, placing himself slightly between the two. Vega laughed, a sound like crystal chimes. Of course not. I'm merely expressing academic interest. She turned to Lyra. I'd love to learn more about your people. Perhaps you could demonstrate your abilities? Lyra, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. Know you, she said, her voice flat. Not traitor. Hunter. Vega's smile didn't falter, but something cold flickered in her eyes. I assure you, I'm quite legitimate in my business dealings. Legitimate slave hunter, still hunter, Lyra replied, her posture now rigid. Still seek profit from pain. Herman looked between them, understanding dawning. You track down valuable slaves who've escaped or been stolen, he said to Vega. That's your real business. Vega sighed, dropping the pretense of friendliness. I prefer asset recovery specialist. But essentially, yes. She focused on Lyra again. And you, my dear, are a particularly interesting case. A Xylosian resonator, presumed disposed of due to defects, suddenly displaying considerable abilities? Certain parties would pay handsomely for your return. She's not going anywhere, Herman stated, his voice hard. She's free here. Free? Vega raised an elegant eyebrow. On this miserable rock, living in a shack with a disgraced engineer? She shook her head. Besides, legal ownership was never properly transferred. The handlers didn't have authorization to give her away. They were going to kill her, Herman protested. So they claimed. A common tactic to offload merchandise off the books. Vega's smile returned, sharp as a blade. I'm willing to be reasonable. Compensation for your caretaking services. More than fair, considering. Leave, Lyra said, a subtle vibration entering her voice. Now, Vega seemed unimpressed by the implied threat. I'll give you time to consider my offer. But I should warn you, I always complete my contracts, one way or another. With a final calculating look, she turned and walked away, her expensive boots clicking on the metal plating of the street. Herman and Lyra returned to their cabin in silence, both preoccupied with the encounter. As they reached the safety of their isolated home, Lyra finally spoke. She will come for me. Herman nodded, already mentally cataloging the few weapons he possessed. A mining laser, a utility knife, little else of use against a professional like Vega. We could leave, he suggested. There are supply ships, maintenance vessels. We could find passage off-world. Lyra shook her head. No time. She has help. Watchers already in colony. She looked around the small cabin that had become their home. Besides, where would we go? Two broken things, one human, one not. We're not broken anymore, Herman said firmly. Or at least, not beyond repair. The ghost of a smile touched Lyra's lips. No, not beyond repair. She moved to the shelf where their small collection of sculptures stood. The bird with its once broken wing, a spiral made of metal shavings, a crude representation of two hands clasped together. You taught me that. Herman felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the heating unit. We'll protect each other, he promised. Whatever comes. Yes, Lyra agreed, but must prepare. Vega is professional. We'll have technology to counter resonance. She touched her throat, where a faint scar was visible when the light hit it, just right. Know how to silence illusions. The thought sent a cold shiver down Herman's spine. Then we'll need to be unpredictable. That night, they made their preparations. Herman reinforced the cabin's single door and the shutters on its small windows. He retrieved the mining laser from its storage compartment, checking its charge and functionality. Lyra, meanwhile, arranged various objects around the cabin, metal cups, ceramic plates, tools from Herman's workbench, in what seemed like random positions. Resonance points, she explained when he questioned the arrangement, will amplify if needed. They agreed to take turns keeping watch, though both doubted they would truly sleep. Herman took the first shift, sitting by the window with the shutter cracked just enough to see the approach path to the cabin. As the artificial night deepened, he found himself reflecting on the strange path that had led him here. From celebrated engineer to disgraced exile to reluctant guardian, each step had seemed like a further descent at the time. Yet somehow, in the depths of his self-imposed punishment, he had found something unexpected. Connection, purpose, even a kind of redemption. Whatever happened tomorrow, Herman realized, he was no longer the empty shell who had haunted this cabin for years. Lyra had helped him find pieces of himself he'd thought lost forever. And perhaps that was the greatest resonance of all. The way two damaged souls could harmonize to create something stronger than either alone. The attack came just before dawn, when the perpetual twilight of Sisyphus 7 was at its darkest. Herman, who had finally succumbed to a light dose despite his best intentions, was jolted awake by Lyra's hand on his shoulder. They come, she whispered, her eyes reflecting the dim glow of the heating unit. 4. Armed. Vega leads. Herman scrambled to his feet, grabbing the mining laser. How did you feel their discord? Lyra explained simply. Against world's pattern. There was no time for further questions. A soft whine outside the cabin signaled the activation of energy weapons. Not mining tools, but military-grade weaponry, far more lethal than anything Herman possessed. Last chance for a civilized resolution. Vega's voice called from outside. Release the Xylosion, and you walk away intact, Herman. She's not property, Herman called back, positioning himself behind the reinforced door. She's a person, making her own choices. How disappointingly predictable, Vega sighed. Very well, the hard way it is. A searing beam of energy cut through the door's reinforcement like it was paper, narrowly missing Herman's head. He dove to the side as a second beam followed, creating an X-shaped pattern of destruction. Herman, Lyra's voice was calm, centered in a way he'd never heard before. Trust me. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the broken, empty creature he'd brought home months ago, but a being of power and determination. Her crimson hair seeming to float slightly as if suspended in water, her eyes clear and focused. Yes, he said without hesitation. I trust you. She nodded once. Then cover your ears. Close your eyes. Whatever happens, don't look until I touch you. Herman did as she instructed, pressing his palms against his ears and squeezing his eyes shut just as the cabin door burst inward. Even through his covered ears, he could hear the beginning of Lyra's resonance, a deep, thrumming note that seemed to start below the range of human hearing and rapidly climb higher. The sound grew, multiplied, rebounded. Lyra was using the objects she'd placed around the cabin as amplification points, creating a web of resonating frequencies that overlapped and reinforced each other. The air itself seemed to vibrate, and Herman could feel the floor beneath him trembling. There were shouts, then screams, Vega and her team experiencing something Herman could only imagine. The resonance built to what felt like an unbearable crescendo, pressure mounting in his ears despite his covered hands. Just when he thought he couldn't endure it any longer, everything stopped. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the noise had been. Herman remained motionless, eyes closed, ears covered, until he felt a gentle touch on his shoulder. Safe now, Lyra said softly. Can look. Herman lowered his hands and opened his eyes. The cabin was in disarray, objects thrown from shelves, the heating unit knocked askew. Vega and 3 heavily armed figures lay unconscious on the floor, their weapons scattered and, from the look of them, completely non-functional. Their power cells cracked, circuitry exposed. What did you do to them? Herman asked, rising shakily to his feet. Dissonance cascade, Lyra explained, looking tired but composed. Affects nervous system technology. She gestured to the unconscious forms. Will wake eventually. Confused. Memory gaps. Herman stared at the scene, trying to process what had just happened. You could have killed them. Yes. Her gaze met his, steady and calm. Chose not to. Life has value, even theirs. The simple statement struck Herman deeply. After all Lyra had suffered, the experiments by her family, the slavery, now this attempted capture, she still recognized the worth of life. All life. You're remarkable, he said, the words wholly inadequate to express his feelings. Lyra tilted her head in her characteristic gesture of consideration. Not remarkable. Just whole again. Because of you. They bound Vega and her team with cable ties found in Herman's workbench, then contacted colony security, such as it was, to take them into custody. The local authorities were unlikely to hold them long, but it would give Herman and Lyra time to decide their next move. We could still leave, Herman suggested as they surveyed the damage to their home. Find another outpost, somewhere further from the main trade routes. Lyra was quiet for a long moment, running her hands over the bird sculpture, which had somehow survived the chaos unscathed. Could, she finally agreed, or could stay. Make this place better. Better? Sisyphus 7. Herman couldn't hide his skepticism. This place exists for people to hide, to forget, to punish themselves. Like I was doing. Yes, many broken people here. Lyra placed the bird back on its shelf. Could help them remember how to be whole. Herman considered this unexpected perspective. Could their isolated existence actually become something more purposeful? The colony was hardly a thriving community, but there were people here people who, like him, might have forgotten their own value. It wouldn't be easy, he warned, and there would be others like Vega, eventually. Nothing valuable is easy, Lyra replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. You taught me that too. As they began to restore order to their small home, Herman felt a sense of possibility he hadn't experienced in years. The cabin suddenly seemed less like a place of exile and more like a beginning. Damaged, yes, in need of repair, but with good bones, as engineers like to say. You know, he said, carefully righting the heating unit, I've been thinking about expanding, adding another room, maybe improving the insulation. Lyra looked up from where she was collecting her scattered resonance objects. Home, she said, testing the word as if it were a new concept. Our home. Yes, Herman agreed, the word feeling right. Our home. Outside, the perpetual twilight of Sisyphus 7 began to lighten slightly, the dim sun rising over the jagged horizon. It wasn't Earth's sun. It would never be that warm, that bright, but it provided light enough to see by, heat enough to survive. And sometimes, Herman was beginning to understand, that was all you needed to start rebuilding. What do you think? He asked, gesturing around at their damaged but fixable shelter. Stay and make something of this place? It won't be easy. Lyra moved to stand beside him, her shoulder just touching his arm, a casual contact that would have been unthinkable months ago. She looked around at the cabin, then out the broken door to the harsh landscape beyond. Not easy, she agreed. But together, she turned to him, and for the first time, her smile was full and unguarded. Together, we make harmony from discord. Always. Herman nodded, returning her smile with one of his own. Always, he echoed, the word a promise, a resonance between them that needed no special abilities to feel. Outside, a rare break in the clouds allowed a shaft of sunlight to penetrate the gloom, illuminating the small cabin on the mountainside, a point of warmth and possibility in the desolate landscape of Sisyphus 7. Within its walls, two beings once considered worthless by the worlds that had rejected them had found in each other something beyond price, recognition of their true value, and the chance to build something new from the broken pieces of their past.